Hi, folks. I'm really happy to be here with you today because I'm here with my good friend, Jim Corbett. And Jim, you grew up here.
I sure did.
You sure did. Yeah, just like me.
We went to school together.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. But, you know, just like my family was in the boat building and shrimping business, Jim's family was in the Pogy plant business. And today I wanted to feature a little bit of history on the Pogy plant. And but before we get into the Pogy plant, Jim, growing up here in Fernandina, and I always ask this question, what was some of your, pick out just a couple of your fondest memories of growing up here in Fernandina? Boy, I know there's too many of them, but pick out just one or two.
Well, I grew up on North Fletcher, first house on the ocean side, back when the road went all the way through from the red light at Atlantic and Fletcher. The road went through what's now the park there that the city's got. Fletcher
Right.
Avenue went all the way through. And I can remember listening to all the music at
Main Beach.
At Main Beach going on, and growing up, and then out where that big condominium is now, I can't remember the name of it, but there was a big sand dune out there we used to call Royal. And boy, as kids, we used to go up there and get a piece of cardboard, and it'd take us what seemed like an hour to get to the top of it, and about 3 minutes to get to the bottom of it. But
it was worth the climb.
Yeah, it was worth the climb, and we had a lot of fun doing that, and growing up on the beach, and then as we end up moving in town, so to speak, to get away from the ocean. Hurricane Dora came in '64. We were living in town then, and of course, getting out of school for a whole week was a big deal, and not fully realizing all the repercussions of everything. But I can remember growing up here. My mother went to bridge club on Thursday nights, and I made sure I was in the bed by the time she got home, because you couldn't get away with nothing in this town, and she'd hear all kind of stuff. And I figured by the time she woke up the next morning, she could be a little easier on me than waiting up and catching her when she first got home that night. So I'd always be in bed by the time she got home from bridge club. But we had a lot of good times growing up here. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew what house everybody lived in. And it was a good place to raise kids from the point of view that, like I said, you couldn't get away with anything.
No. You know, that's the one thing that everybody that we've had in all of these series that grew up here that we've interviewed, that's the one synonymous thing that has always come out. You couldn't get away with anything in this town because everybody knew everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And come this way just a hair. What would you estimate? I estimate when we were growing up, there was about 3,500 people on this island.
I don't know. I do know something about Nick though. When we were in, I think it was 10th grade in English, we were supposed to do some kind of book report, and Nick got upset about something, and he said, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do." He said, "I'm going to write a book." And so Nick put it upon himself, and he started writing a book, the Big Black Bear or something like that. You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And Nick was going to show the teacher that it wasn't nothing to reading and writing a book. So and he wrote him a book, and as you can see now, he's still carrying that tradition on. So.
Well, that was one of the nicer things that I did. Yeah, you don't have to go any further. You can stop right there. Yeah. Jim, let's talk about the Pogy industry. The Pogy fish, the reason Well, let's go to the reason for the Pogy fish. Why were the Pogy fish? What was the purpose of wanting the Pogy fish?
Well, first of all, you got to understand that Pogy is our slang name for menhaden. It seemed like each section of the east coast of the United States had a slang name for the menhaden fish. They were called pogies in this area. In other areas, they were called bunkers. Up north, they were called moss bunkers. In some areas, they even called shad. But the menhaden reproduces at a fantastic rate. One female menhaden is capable of producing 250,000 eggs, 250,000 eggs. That's just one female giving off 250,000 eggs. And so they travel in large schools, and nobody really knows why, but everybody seems to think that probably it's for protection. And they don't eat other fish. They swim with their mouth open and eat plankton or whatever's in the water. And so they're a so-called trash fish, but they're also a predator fish in the sense that a lot of the big fishes that everybody likes to catch will feed on the menhaden. But since they travel in such large schools, if you get up in the air a little bit, early on in the industry, they used to have a crow's nest on the mast of the vessel, and the fishermen would get up in the crow's nest and spot the fish, and then they'd be able to set their nets around that way. By the time I came along, we were using airplanes to spot the fish, and fish looked like a big black dot in the blue water, and with radios, they could get in touch with the motherships and direct them to where the fish were and have them set the nets around the places of fish with the help of the airplane pilot, the radio on down to the purse boats that would actually set the net. In 1900, there were about 200 pogy plants on the east coast of the United States, and in 2000, there were 2. So it went from 200 to 2 in 100 years.
Wow.
And you can slice the pie 3 ways. How big a piece you cut depends on how you want to argue the thing, but certainly overfishing was one. Destruction of habitat was the second one, and pollution was the third one. And like I say, you could cut that any way you want to and argue about it, but those were the 3 main culprits of why the resource was depleted. But what we would do, Nick, is once we got out to the fishing grounds and we were directed to where the fish were, a pogy net is a purse seine. It's a long rectangular shaped net that would stretch, good night alive, 1/4 of a mile long. And it would drop down about up to 60 feet in the water. And so we had 2 purse boats that would go side by side. Each had half the net in it. And at the command of the man in the airplane, they would pull away from each other and pull that net out and circle around the fish.
Now, we got a picture of that. We'll be seeing on this interview.
The net had a metal ring at the bottom of it that had a rope run through every one of them. And the weight of that metal ring would cause the net to sink. And then the rope that went through each one of those metal rings was tightened up, and it would close the net from the bottom. It's like a woman's handbag or a woman's purse, where you draw the strings and it closes at the top. You turn it upside down, and that's how it got the name of being a purse seine.
Oh.
It had a cork line on the top to keep the net from sinking from the top. And once you went around the fish and closed up the bottom, then it was just a matter of working your net back into the boats. And you had to be careful how you worked it back in there, because that's the way it was coming out the next time you set the net. And you'd concentrate the fish in the center of the net. And then we had a 10-inch pump that we would drop into that triangle between the 2 purse boats and the mothership. And that pump would pump seawater. The fish happened to be into the seawater, and they'd pump them on board the vessel.
I see.
And we had a housing unit on top of the fish hole that the fish would fall on the screen and go into the boat. The water would go through the screen and come out the other side of the boat. And then when we got back to the dock, we'd flood the fish hole with water. And here again, we had a pump that would pump that water out and pump the fish up to the processing ground.
Now, when you got it to the processing ground here, and we're at the Pogy plant today, but this is where you started cooking the fish and squeezing the fish, getting the oil out of the fish. And I know you wanted the fish oil. That was one thing, because we used the fish oil at the boat yard for a couple of things. And then you wanted the, once they were cooked, you wanted the meal of the fish. Tell me a little bit about the product.
Well, the process was, the fish were fed into a enclosed auger. It was totally enclosed, and it ran about 40 feet long and had steam pushed into that auger, enclosed auger, in several places, so that by the time the fish traveled the whole length, 40-foot length of that enclosed auger, with the steam shot into it, it would be kind of a slush coming out the end. That slush of the liquefied fish, perhaps you could say, went into a press. And here again, the press was an auger where the shaft of it got thicker and thicker, and the blades got shorter and shorter, so it concentrated all that together, and the liquid part would go out the bottom, and then what we used to call the press cake would come out the other end. That press cake was about 50% moisture, and we had to run it through a dehydrator to get that moisture out of it, and that made the fish meal. And that also created the odor that the Pogy plant was famous for. Whenever we dried out those that fish cake, or that press cake, as we called it, the water that came out from underneath the fish press was then heated up to 180 degrees, where it would separate the oil from the water and run through a centrifuge, basically on the same type of process as taking milk and getting the cream out of it. Most of the fish oil at the time that we were producing was sent overseas, or it was used as an additive in cosmetics, or anything to prevent rust. A lot of paints carried fish oil in it.
Let's go to the cosmetics. Revlon was a big.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Listen up, ladies. Listen up. I just want you to understand this lipstick that we all like, even us guys. I mean, now we don't buy it in the tubes. We would rather kiss you and get some that way. But a lot of that was fish oil. So,
well, that fish oil was refined to some degree.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, now they use synthetic oils in most of the cosmetics. They don't use the fish oil.
Now, you know, I just got to say, the smell, that back to the smell, for you guys that are newcomers and you weren't here in the day when they were processing the fish, you prayed for a wind blowing north, because, oh boy, the smell. Now, for all of us who were born and raised here, it didn't seem to bother us too much. I know it never bothered me, but man, I tell you what, if you were new to town or you were visiting and they were processing the fish, it was like, wow, you have got to be kidding me. What is this smell that I'm smelling? And of course, it was the Pogy plant cooking fish.
Well, once we dried those fish out that created the odor, fish meal was used mostly in animal rations. And a lot of chickens, poultry industry bought a lot of the fish meal to use in feeding the chickens. And like I said, the fish oil mostly went over to Europe to be used as the same way we use vegetable oils and animal fat. Basically, the fish oil is the fat that's in that's in the fish. The FDA would not approve fish oil for human consumption until a great majority of all the menhaden reduction facilities had gone out of business. It was so-called.
Is it approved now?
Yeah,
Is it? And so, is this what kind of like
the little tablets that you
the little
take for
fish
your
tablet?
heart?
Yeah. I'll be doggone. I didn't know that. I take 2 a day.
Yeah, well, that's mostly
Menhaden.
No, it's probably comes from another type of fish.
But it's fish oil.
It is fish oil.
But it's fish oil. Okay. Jim, did you ever think, you know, I know I didn't, but did you ever think we would realize and see the growth that we have today?
No, it shows the prosperity of the country. I use that as an example that the odor that we talked about, Nick, that was highly acceptable whenever we were coming up, and certainly for generations ahead of that. Our company started in 1911, so we've been around a long time. But it was after the Second World War and the greatest generation and getting on into the 60s and 70s where people wanted to come be near the water. And all of a sudden, because of the prosperity of the country, you could make a case that this odor that you and I had no problem with, other than the fact we knew it smelled, it became unacceptable. And so the state of Florida basically told us that if we didn't do something about the odor, we'd have to shut down. And what we did is we created a furnace where we were able to siphon off the gases from drying out the fish and literally burn them up to help take care of that odor. And then in the late 1980s, that piece of equipment was, it went on to blink, and it needed to be reworked, and it was going to be very expensive to do that. And so we asked the state of Florida for a variance until we could get that finished because it was right in the middle of the fishing season. And they denied our request for the variance, and so we were forced to shut the fishing operations down. So that's what actually, we were one of the last ones on the East Coast to shut down. There probably were only 6 plants running whenever we finally shut our operation down. But the pogie fish migrate, and in the wintertime, they move back down this way, and then, of course, they migrate back up to the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean in the
so
warmer
they
months.
basically a cold water fish.
Well, it's a warm water fish. And but similar to a shrimp, when those females produce the eggs are washed inshore, and that's where the menhaden grew up.
Oh, okay.
And they mature and they come out of the rivers. So you get local fish throughout the year, but if the fish lives to be longer than a year old, they begin that migratory pattern of heading north in the summer, similar to what people do, and heading back south in the winter.
Okay, I got you. Well, the pogie plant, the most of it is still intact and still here today, although it's some of it is just rented out to tenants, and they do, you know, different waterfront jobs and projects and things like that. Well, Jim, I'm sure that our viewers are going to get a lot out of the pogie plant. They're going to understand what the pogie plant's all about. Everybody, especially the newcomers, they hear about the pogie plant. They know the pogie plant's here, but have no idea what the pogie plant was all about and what it did. This, that, and another.
Well, you keep talking about the pogie plant. Actually, Nick, there were 3 pogie plants out here. Smith family had a pogie plant, and Quinn Menhaden was just south of us, and then Nassau Fertilizer, our company, was in the center. So there were actually, in its heyday, right after the Second World War, there were 3 separate pogie plants out here, each one of them fishing between 5 and 10 boats. And the crew on a boat at that time was 26 people. So you can imagine how many people were employed out here at one time in the menhaden industry.
Yep, huge industry.
Oh, yeah. Once upon a time, St. Mary's had a pogie plant. There was a pogie plant over at Fort George as well, just in this area. So menhaden production was pretty strong. And the original use of it, why our company name is Nassau Fertilizer, was that the fish was used as a fertilizer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Before they switched and started using it in animal rations.
Yeah.
Legend has it that the Indians showed the Pilgrims how to plant corn, and they put a fish in there as a fertilizer.
Yeah.
And the assumption is that that was probably a pogy fish or a menhaden that the Indians shoot.
Well,
Pilgrims
inshore
out to
could
do.
catch it with a net
There you
and probably wade out there and, you know, set a net and pull them in like a seine net.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
were
I
pretty
could
prevalent
understand
back
that. Yeah.
And
I
they
could
used to
understand
take them and boil them.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with that, once they boiled the fish and got temperature up high enough, it was that oil would separate,
Mm-hmm.
and they could use that oil the same way they used to light lamps and all
Mm-hmm.
kinds
Yeah.
of stuff.
Well, same thing with the whale oil.
Mm-hmm.
You know, take
Well,
the blubber, boil it. Here
there
comes
you
the
go.
oil. You know,
Very,
so
very similar.
very similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
Dadgum. Well, Jim, I thank you for the interview, and
Okay.
you know, we hopefully we're going to do some more interviews with you as time goes on, because this whole series is, like I said, is going to take about 15 months to do. And but I've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it, and folks, I hope you all the old timers are really going to get a kick out of this. You know, thinking back at the Pogy plant, looking at the photographs that you've been so gracious to share with us for this segment, and I do appreciate it. I really do.
Well, it's good to see you. Bring back old memories.
I know
a lot of crazy things that
yeah, sometimes
all of us that grew up in the fishing industry.
Yeah, I'm surprised we're both still here, really, if you want to know the truth about it.
I hear that.
But for all the you know, for all of us that grew up here, I know this is going to spark some memories, and for all of you guys that are new here, I hope it helps you just realize what it was like to grow up here in Fernandina in the 50s and 60s. And so anyway, until next time, we'll see you on the road, and God bless.
Amen.